Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge, or in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara Riska, life coach, wife, and the mother of 4 incredible and unique kids. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I completely lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and grace that once felt so completely lacking. I started the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves up against what feels impossible. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle the dreams that you hold impossible now. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you're a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome.
Well, hello there, and welcome again to the Special Needs Mom podcast. My guest today is Kaitlyn McCarty, and Kaitlyn's an associate therapist working in Orange County. She's on staff with a nonprofit called Freedom Movement, and we'll link to that. Freedom Movement works towards creating a safe space that fosters healing, hope, and the courage to love who God created you to be. Kaitlyn sees her work at Freedom Movement as carrying an extension of this heartbeat. And she creates a space for the individual to explore her own story and her own heart in a way that brings understanding and growth. She comes to Freedom Movement with over 15 years of experience in ministry, and Kaitlyn's been married 17 years, has 4 daughters, ages 14 to 3, and has a BS in psychology from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, my favorite, and a master's in marriage and family therapy from Fresno Pacific Bible Seminary. I just finished this episode recording with Kaitlyn, and we talked about compassion. We talked about suffering. We talked about expanding ourselves. And it was a conversation that served me, and I absolutely know it's going to serve you. Let's get right to it.
Kaitlyn, oh my gosh, welcome to the show. I am so glad that our worlds have stayed connected over I think I just spit out 20 years. I think it's been about 20 years that we've been acquaintances. And thanks to the invention of social media, we've gotten to stay connected. A little bit of background, Kaitlyn and I were part of the same college club back at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And the memories I have of you are that you were just, one, so energetic. She's a college athlete, and so inclusive and kind. So thank you for being that way. And I'm sure that's how you show up in your own life.
Thank you. So sweet. And actually, a fun story is that I spent a summer in Mexico with your husband.
I forgot about that.
Yep.
Oh, you know, Dan the man.
And learned that he was a man of character and integrity and really appreciated him. Fun too.
That is a really fun fact. Yeah, I totally scored in the husband category. So that is so fun. Well, we can do a little Spanish version of this next then.
I'm a little rusty, but
I know, me too. Anyhow, that's fun. I love Mexico. And Dan and I actually, it must not have been the summer that you were there, but we rendezvoused in Mexico because I studied in Mexico during college. And so
cool.
We have very close ties and close hearts to Mexico and Mexico City and Cuernavaca and all that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, super fun. Well, let's give our listeners a little bit more background about how you come to life, or a little bit more about your life. Tell us a little bit about what your life typically looks like.
So, of course, my life doesn't look like it typically did. But at the same time, I guess for the past few years, that's probably been true. So I've been married since right out of college, and have an incredible husband who is, one of the things I appreciate most about him is he is willing to grow alongside of me. But we have 4 daughters. They range in age from 14 to just turned 4. And we were pretty surprised when number 4 came along. And
that's funny.
So that was kind of when all of the unexpected started in life. And, it's funny because I work for an organization called Freedom Movement. It's a nonprofit. It's just, it's a one of a kind. It's incredible. And I actually went to a vision dinner, 5 years ago for Freedom Movement. And they were talking about how one day they would love to open some sort of a counseling center that would be like an extension of their heart and what they do on tour and what they do with churches and that kind of thing. And I just started praying about that. And I felt like there was just this big yes, that like this was meant to be for me to join this. And actually the next weekend, I found out I was pregnant.
Oh
so
my gosh.
The past 5 years have really gone so differently than I anticipated. However, there has been a lot of really exciting things that have played out in it. And I think as quarantine came along, I felt a little bit more used to the pivot because my life has included a lot of pivots.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you work as a therapist, right? Primarily?
Yeah. So I did my master's in marriage family therapy right after undergrad. So 15 years ago, something like that. And I graduated like 15 years ago. And then had my first kid right around the same time. And so just within the last couple of years did I go back and start. I did a lot of volunteering, a lot of ministry, but just in the last couple of years did I start actually moving forward with doing therapy. And it's interesting how much I have grown and learned since I graduated.
I can only imagine the difference about when you did the education part of that versus now when you're practicing it every day and working with people, how different it is, especially when you add that 15 plus years of life experience. Yeah. I'm sure that's that your eyes are much more open.
Yes.
So what was I going to mention? There's something I saw. Oh, and I think that, it's actually been really fun as I've seen you on the periphery on social media. I've seen this. Oh, wow, she's a therapist. I had no idea because, I knew who you were in college, but we didn't necessarily have class together. I didn't necessarily know what you were studying. You studied psychology. Did you always know that you wanted to go in that direction?
I did. I thought that would be my path. And years ago, I did one of those strengths finder tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I learned that my top 2 strengths are empathy and strategic. And I realized I think it's a perfect fit for what I get to do in therapy. So it's felt like definitely my best lane.
Yeah. That's an amazing pairing. I love that. And StrengthsFinder Maximizer is my top one, which essentially is we work with, basically, we love to take things from good to great. Ooh. And when I saw that one, I was like 100% yes. I love, that's just what I love to do. Like in junior high, I had, we had lockers back then, and I decked that thing out. I put carpet in it. I'm like, okay, also major dork, but that's okay. I was like, I'm going to make this locker the best locker it can be.
Yes. Gosh, I wonder where Maximizer was on my list. I have to imagine it's probably not super high. And so I can really appreciate that about someone.
That's awesome. Empathy and strategic. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit more about your journey as what I would classify a mom of a special needs child. And you shared with me recently, you don't always connect and put yourself in that category, but then, through some of our conversations, you realize, well, I kind of am. And so tell us a little bit about that journey and your experience so far with that.
Yeah. So I remember years ago, a friend of mine who has a son with Down syndrome posted that poem, Welcome to Holland. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not.
So we can link to it, but it's basically this poem that says, when you're having a baby, it's like planning this trip, and you think you're planning this trip to Italy, and when you have a special needs kid, you realize that all of a sudden you didn't arrive in Italy, you arrived in Holland.
I think now that you say this, I think I might have seen this poem, and
yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's this disorientation that comes from, I thought I was going to Italy and I had everything with expectations and assumptions of landing in Italy. And here I am in Holland. And I remember reading it, understanding about, my friend's journey with a special needs son, but I found myself weeping, knowing that in my heart of hearts, I identified just as much with this journey, having a kid that had severe ADHD, as well as some learning disabilities and some other pieces that make life really challenging for her, as well as make parenting incredibly challenging. And I think that one of the things that is tricky is that some of the struggles that my child has are similar to what other parents experience. And I think one of the things that I have had to maybe drive a stake into and realize is that the intensity, the severity, and the kind of consistency of the issues that we're dealing with really are on a completely different level. And so I think maybe that was some of why I would minimize some of what I experienced and had a hard time landing on this idea that I'm a special needs mom raising a child with special needs. And I've actually found that reminding myself of that brings some compassion and some, maybe even some options, when the alternative is the frustration, the shame, the at your wit's end wanting to pull your hair out, that kind of stuff.
That's brilliant. I love the way, taking on a new identity and actually having it be an identity of, I don't want to say pride's not the right word, but it's acceptance and honoring what is. And I think I know that I'm still working on accepting some parts of my son's behavior. that are particularly hard to be with. And I know that the journey is acceptance and accepting the reality that everything in my home might be broken just with the behavior outbursts that he has. You mentioned something I think is really interesting. So your daughter has some similar struggles that I think most parents have. So, and I would relate in the sense that my son has impulse control challenges, and it's a formal diagnosis in the sense that like we have gone through a lot of neuropsychological evaluations, et cetera, et cetera. So I can say, no, I'm not making this up. Like we have agreement from many people that this is beyond the scope of what we could call typical. Yet I find that people want to normalize the behavior. Like, oh, I understand what you're talking about. And my son or daughter too has impulse control challenges. And I find myself sometimes be like, but no, you don't understand. Like, you don't understand to the extent. And it sounds like, do you relate to that at all?
I definitely do. I think all kids have a hard time regulating their emotions and their behavior. But when it comes to ADHD and when it comes to OCD, another diagnosis that popped on in junior high, you're in a different realm. There's a, specifically with when it comes to what they notice in some of the shifts in the brain, and that would be unique for your child, I'm sure, but maybe along the same lines is with ADHD, they notice that, some of the areas of the brain are just not firing up to help regulate, the behavior and the emotion in ways that a typical brain would. And I have found, kind of like you were saying, is that some of that information is really empowering to me because I can remind myself, no, what this child is dealing with looks different, and how I approach it in parenting has to look different as well as the fact that it doesn't pop up just sometimes the way it does for my kind of neurotypical kids. It pops up with a frequency that really can be exhausting.
I hear you. Probably a frequency and probably an intensity is my guess. And the intensity sometimes for me can be, I almost wish sometimes people could watch it, because a couple friends have seen a couple things here and there. And they've even said to me, Kara, like, I know you've told me what you experience, but I didn't, like, they said it in a nice way. They said, I didn't believe you. And because it almost is unbelievable to see, because my son is so sweet and so tender and he loves people so much. And when he's in a state of emotional dysregulation, he's a very different person.
Yeah.
And I think what you hit on is allowing us to remember. And so in my case, in my son's case, the impact from his surgery actually did damage the part of his brain that would be regulating these things in a typical child. And so our work is rebuilding. And the beautiful thing about the brain, and I'm sure it goes for your daughter as well, that the brain is so amazing and it has so much capacity. And for me, it gives me so much hope that there is possibility of growth.
Yeah, I can definitely connect to that. And I think one of the things that's really, been so challenging about having a child with special needs is, I'm someone who's wired for relationships, and I have invested my whole life in trying to do relationships well. And then I had this child, my first child, who I felt like a huge failure. For the first 4 years of my child's life, I felt like I looked at everyone else and I thought, clearly I'm doing something really wrong. Because there were certain things like being hard to transition, or just having trouble regulating emotion, behavior, that kind of stuff that came up from birth. And I used to pull her out of everywhere we went, like under my arm, kicking and screaming, going, something's not right with this. It wasn't until about 4 that I started saying, oh, this actually might be about this child, maybe even more so than my parenting. But even at that point, I think one of the hardest things in life is not knowing how to partner with someone that you love so much. You want to be able to come alongside someone you love and just like love them well. And you think, gosh, if I'm kind, I'm loving, then that should reap a reward. But parenting with my child, it didn't look typical. And I had a master's in marriage family therapy too, right? I thought like, I think I'm good. I think this will go really well. But I was humbled from the very beginning, which in a lot of ways I can look back and appreciate who I've become in all of that. But I think that, one of the biggest challenges was being confronted with, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help this person. I don't know how to partner well with them. I don't know how to love them. And I think when faced with that, it feels kind of like this precipice of like, what's next? And I think what it really looked like was, oh my gosh, I have to now dig in even more and figure out how to grow and how to shift in that. And that's kind of where it's like, okay, I actually am in Holland. And there are some incredible things in Holland, even though I thought I was going to be in Italy. But actually, one of the biggest things is the way the growth process has changed me so much that makes me so thankful for having arrived in Holland, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And I want to hear a little bit more about that growth and change process. But before we go there, you mentioned the wanting to love your daughter so well, that concept. And you didn't necessarily say it, but I think the experience, my guess, is in situations where sometimes it's really hard to love her behavior or the experience that you're having as a mom. I have really been thinking a lot about this lately because I think that it's like it actually asks our brain to kind of be in two possibilities at one time. Because in one hand, we have to fully and wholly accept this child for exactly who they are, not for who we wish they were or that we think that they can be one day. Yeah. And then on the other hand, it's our job to teach our kids the skills that we believe that they will benefit from having in life. And so we're asking them to be different than they are, right? Or to learn something.
Right.
And so we actually have to ask our brain to kind of go in these two places at one time. Mm-hmm. And it's really been that I've been kind of really digging deeper and deeper into this. And so what would you say about kind of how you hold those two things for yourself?
One of the things that comes up when you talk about that is this idea of outcome. I've realized, especially over the last couple of years, that I have a lot of ingrained expectations in me and a lot of things, even just culturally, when we think about how we're wired for productivity and success and an outcome, really, is that I think that there's a lot of areas where I really hold on to this idea of outcome. I hope that if I do these certain things, or if I can get my child to do these certain things, it will present a certain outcome. And there's been just a lot of times where I have to step back and maybe get some awareness of what outcome I'm trying to pair things up against and let that go and maybe pick up another alternative. Like, we're just, gosh, I'm not even sure what it would be at this point. Maybe it's sitting in the tension of like what you're talking about, a level of acceptance and kind of a determination towards growth, even if that growth isn't lined up with the certain outcomes that we would maybe ascribe to as like best case scenario outcomes.
That makes so much sense. And I remember this moment in my kitchen where I was confronted with something about my son's health, a habit that he has that it just kind of really triggered me every time. And I had this thought, and this might sound kind of morbid to some people, but I trust that we'll go with it here. I had this thought that maybe he's not supposed to live to 80 or 90 years old, just like the prescribed, this is the way that we should do life should go. Now, to be clear, by no means do I want him to not have a long, wonderful life, but accepting the idea that the life that he is supposed to have might be different than the life that I prescribed for him. And so I think that's when you talk about outcome, I love the freedom in like letting go of the outcome that we think is best for them, and kind of allowing a bigger picture in, and actually like realize that that's a limiting way of thinking about it. And by holding more loosely to what we think life should look like for them allows so much freedom. So thank you for putting that in there. So let's talk about this growth. You mentioned earlier that, having the particular set of children that you have has been the single most causal agent of your personal growth and change. Yeah. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
I could probably talk all day about that.
I know.
Because it's just been so much. But I think it's definitely, I'm constantly bumping up against things that are outside of my control when it comes to parenting my child, my kids, and when it comes to, what it looks like to be able to have things turn out the way I want them to turn out. And so I think that as I go through a process of, like we've been talking about, acceptance and some grief, when I bump up against things that I wouldn't have chosen to be there, I notice that as I do that process again and again of kind of the realizations, the grieving, the acceptance, I notice that things inside of me expand during that process. I don't know exactly, the science of that, but I watch it happening again and again. I think there used to be a lot of judgments that I would make about people, about what the process should look like, about what parenting should look like. And also I used to exist pretty well inside some boxes. My brilliant child with special needs, who is also very gifted, loves to just blow up all the boxes. And that has been incredibly uncomfortable, as well as some other words. But I just keep having to expand. I think it brings up another thing, is that I think as parents, one of our greatest gifts to offer is to be containers for our kids, who they can come to us and they can bring, what's inside, their emotions, their thoughts, their experiences. And hopefully, we could extend our arms out and we could hold those. And, that's so easy when, my second grader might come to me and say, oh, well, this kid at school, made fun of, my speech and I didn't like it. And, I'm like, yeah, I can hold that. I know what to do. But having a child that is confronted with things that I've never, my whole thing says, oh my gosh, to be able to hold this as a container, I actually have to stretch and get so much bigger. And I'm willing to do that for you. But that stretching has been really painful. And choosing to lean in instead of to lean out has come at a big cost. but one I would never trade. I notice how it translates to actually having a bigger capacity for anyone that enters my office now, because I have confronted, oh, well, there's things I don't understand going on here, specifically with ADHD and OCD and the Tourette's and the learning disabilities, a lot of pieces that I didn't understand. And so I had to stretch and I had to figure out, what does it look like to partner with this because it's different? And I think that also translates to then repeating that process with whoever comes across my path. Hey, let's figure this out together and let's have a ton of compassion for ourselves as we do, because sometimes it's really tricky.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of expansion and recognizing that the things that these kids present us with, they hit up against our own limiting beliefs or the programming that we have that doesn't allow to have those things be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where for me, it's like, okay, definitely need some different thinking here, because the thinking I have right now, the way I'm relating to this, the way I'm being, is creating a lot of pain and suffering and an experience of stuckness, where knowing that likely my situation's not going to change. So having that be very limiting to my experience. You mentioned compassionate. I'd love to hear about how you relate to compassion, how you practice compassion with yourself, maybe even how you support your clients in the area of compassion.
A quote that comes to mind is by this psychologist named James Finley. And I listened to him speak one time, and he said, there's always going to be a part of us that doesn't get it. And if at the end of the day, if we can extend some kindness to that part of us, to him, that was like one of the biggest things. And that just really struck me, because honestly, at the end of the day, there's always a part of me that falls short, that doesn't get it, that maybe realized something that I thought otherwise for so long, or, right? There's just these limited parts of myself. And I think the alternative was, can I manage these parts through anxiety, through a harsh or critical voice, and through judgment, or a try harder, and really seeing that led me nowhere I wanted to go.
We've all tried it.
Right? And we keep trying it, I'm sure.
Yeah, we do.
But if I can make a little bit more room for kindness, like when all of a sudden I'm upside down because my child's behavior, really impacted me, and I lost my temper, and all of a sudden I'm upside down again. And it looks a lot different when I pause and I go, oh, hey, what happened there? When I become a bit more of an observer of myself instead of a harsh judge, I make a little bit more room for kindness. Like, oh, I could maybe see what added up to that. I also notice that it lends to some more options. If I can be observant and kind as opposed to harsh and judgmental, I then can go, hey, maybe there's something I'm needing here that I want to address. Or maybe there's something I want to talk out with somebody. Or maybe there's just something we could all grow in. It feels like I can access those options more through that route of observation and kindness, with the acceptance that I'm limited, that I'm flawed, that I'm always going to sometimes get it wrong.
I love the way you just described that. Especially, you said a couple times, a little bit more kindness. And I think that, to me, it kind of describes the approach of compassion. Recognizing it's not all or nothing, right? It's not like, oh, I'm either going to be compassionate or I'm going to be judgmental. But compassion is bringing that little bit more kindness, right? And I love the picture that you described. And I can imagine myself like in my own kitchen. We have a lot of issues in the kitchen. In the kitchen where we're, in the middle, or maybe just after an explosion, literally, things flying everywhere. And where if I give myself it to my own experience and to like be in the humanity of what it's like to, in my case, physically have something that's like feels physically safe right now.
Right.
And just to give yourself that little bit of space and a little bit more kindness. And something that I practice with my clients in whether it's kindness, compassion, or a lot of different things is practicing 1% more. And it kind of gives our brain the idea of like, oh, okay, like I just have to be a little bit different or access something a little bit different than what I've been doing. And so I really love a little bit of compassion. Recently, I posted on, I'm kind of switching gears. You recently posted on Instagram something that I resonated with so significantly. It was about suffering. And I'm going to read actually a couple things that you wrote. I'd love to kind of just expand the conversation. You wrote, "We live in a culture and a church culture that has attempted to eradicate suffering." And you also wrote, "Christian culture can be dangerously good at trying to keep the, in quotes, bad out." And I'd love to hear kind of more on that. I'll actually share a little bit more about my experience before I turn it over to you. Yeah. Something I experienced early in my son's recovery was, so just if anyone hasn't listened to the previous episodes, my son at the age of 2 was diagnosed with brain tumor and had a craniotomy. And we did 2 months of intensive recovery, inpatient in the hospital. And where because he had lost part of his vision, mobility of the left side of his body. I could go on. And then specifically has some medical conditions that require him taking supplemental hormones. And at that point, it wasn't even the behavior challenges because he was an adorable 2-year-old. And I noticed to my experience of relating to people was that people would say, "Hey, how's Levi doing?" And I would go into then, "Oh, well, let me tell you all the updates since you asked." And I would actually, I think I was probably desperate to be sharing this with somebody. So probably there was a lot of stuff on my side as well. But what I experienced, and this is just kind of my judgment, right, was that people were like, I actually just wanted to hear he was okay. I mean, that was what I was thinking, how they were responding. They didn't want to do the long journey of where like he wasn't walking yet and no, this is how he is forever. And like, we're not back to before and et cetera, et cetera. And so I just noticed that I found that people really only wanted, "I'm doing great" answer. And I've noticed, so I'm very aware of it now. I'm probably a little bit resistant when I even go into church and it's like, everything has to be good here. And I guess I'm almost like, no, everything doesn't have to be good here. And so I'd love to hear kind of your take and experience with that yourself.
I think for us as humans, we just naturally gravitate towards categorizing things and trying to put things in, the categories that make sense to us. And I think it's a natural thing that happens that we gravitate towards that. But I think that sometimes what happens in just with humans in general and in churches is this idea of we would like to know what the boxes are, what the categories are. And we also sometimes would like to make a line. This is who's in, this is who's out. And if we know what the line is, then we can hopefully keep ourselves in. But the problem with that is that it's really hard to feel safe if you're trying to navigate a line or if you're trying to always fit into boxes. And so I think that's a little bit of where, Freedom Movement is really passionate about is partnering with the church to really explore what it looks like to be safer for one another, to maybe explore some of our own heart of where we've tried so hard to kind of maybe fit into the right things and fell short, or maybe how afraid we are to be outside of the line, or, that we feel has been drawn, and how can we reevaluate some of that process in a way that makes room for people's hearts and people's unique challenges. And so I think for me personally, a little bit about what that has looked like for me. Sorry, we have a puppy and she's barking.
No worries. Joined the crowd during pandemic and got a puppy.
100%.
We're close behind you.
It's had its ups and downs, but so is life. So I think that one of the things that I think has been really important for me on this topic is I'm a pleaser and I have always fit pretty well in the boxes, but I've always been super scared of getting in trouble. And so there's been certain reactions towards my child that have really caused me to question my child, to question myself, to question my parenting. I got to this point where I recognized that I was letting other people have the biggest voice on who my child was and who I was. And there was a real kind of awakening that came of like, that's not right. I don't want anybody else to define my worth or my child's worth. And I want to be the one that holds that. And for me as a Christian, I want God to be the one, that weighs in on that in a way that's good and lovely and true. And because my child doesn't fit well in boxes and often likes to just kind of blow up those boxes, I think there's been some really important work for me there. And I can imagine for a lot of us with special needs kids, especially as they enter junior high and high school, that would be some important work.
Oh my gosh, you hit on something so big here. I could almost do a whole episode on the reactions to our children and what it brings out in us, right? I notice that like, I want to stay in the line, like you were talking about, like I want to be in the in group and I want to be accepted and I want to feel like a cool kid, I mean, to some degree, right? I have this one picture of I was dropping off the kids to school. They have a, little drive up. You let open the doors of the van. Everyone gets out.
Yes.
And on this particular day, my son Levi was having some emotions about some things, and he tried to shut me, so he can be very physically aggressive, and he was trying to shut me in the door, in my door, he was trying to slam the door on me. So there's this mom defending herself from her darling son. I was in survival, but then I realized that there was this mom that I know walking by, and I know her just a little bit. She has a daughter, and of course I'm like, oh my gosh, what is she thinking right now? So easy for me then to take that, maybe it was being embarrassment, take that embarrassment out on my child, right? And say, and I mean, I can only imagine the things I might do when I'm acting from that embarrassment. Mm-hmm. And I think what you just touched on is really being willing to, you were talking about earlier, expand enough to where the rules, and we actually say, that doesn't work for my child, or no, I'm not going to follow that social norm because there's just so many things we could say here as moms, but really being the mom who's willing to be uncomfortable and to break the rules and to stand for what's right for your child. It takes a lot of strength inside, right? And being willing to be really uncomfortable a lot of the time. So thank you so much for hitting on that. I think that actually would be a really, really great future episode. Getting close to the end here, and you mentioned a couple times the word grief. And I know my experience has brought on so many different episodes of grief. And I'm so thankful in our case, in my story, that we didn't know everything. What we knew on the diagnosis day was that he had a tumor. And that what we knew after that is it was operable. After a surgery, we knew he survived the surgery, but we didn't know the visual impairment. We didn't know the extent of essentially the brain damage and the physical. And we, for years, didn't know the behavioral challenges. And I'm so thankful for that because it's allowed me to almost have bite-sized pieces. And, that's not always the case. We don't always have that luxury. But I'd love to hear a little bit, both from your experience as a mom with grief, but then also your how you would support people to think about grief kind of from your training and your background?
I think oftentimes we just associate grief with death.
Yeah.
But grief comes up with losses that we experience. And those losses could simply be a loss of expectation. And I think oftentimes we don't connect a loss of expectation with grief. But what's actually happening internally is some grief is bubbling up. I had a miscarriage when I was, for my first pregnancy, I miscarried, and I experienced so much grief around that. And I realized that a lot of the grief was really linked to the expectations I had of what life would look like moving forward. And I think that was when that realization really hit me, was because I had to make some room to grieve. And when we don't, even if grief is what's going on because of a loss of expectation or things not working out the way we hoped, or being faced with a diagnosis that we would have never chosen for our child, oftentimes we notice a lot of other emotions, and that might be anger or anxiety, or maybe being distraught or panic, or just feeling stressed and exhausted. We might want to ask ourselves, is there some grief underneath this other emotion that I'm experiencing? And for me, in this journey, probably 9 times out of 10, there has been. And when I stop and think through or talk through what that grief might be related to, it's given me a lot of clarity, so that I've been able to oftentimes move forward. It's surprising to me how, when we don't acknowledge our grief and when we don't grieve, how stuck we can get.
How do you notice that people try to cover up or avoid the grief in your professional work?
Moving towards control.
Oh, yeah. I love control. I mean, I love control as much as anybody, but particularly in working with my clients in the coaching capacity, what's great is control masquerades itself for people as being like a really good mom, right? And so like what looks like someone that's like just on top of things, organized, and I'm not saying any of those things are bad by no means, but there's this element of which it's starting to control the essentially uncontrollable, or controlling other people, so that it's brilliant. I mean, it really is brilliant, but unfortunately it doesn't work.
For me too, I try to control through anxiety, which that just makes no sense. It just makes no sense. And yet, again and again, here I am. Well, if I anxiously, think through all of the things and worry about them, then maybe I can somehow control their outcome. Like, I say it and it just sounds like, how could that ever work? And yet somehow I often think I'm gonna, help something, or at least I'm doing something. There's this motivation there. At least I'm doing something, or maybe I can try to control the outcome by my anxiety.
Oh man, that word anxiety, it comes up, I think, for all of us, and in so many different ways. And kind of as we come to a close, I'd love for you to touch on this really quickly. How, when you notice you are experiencing anxiety or even creating anxiety, how do you handle, how do you be with yourself?
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. Oftentimes when we move into a place of anxiety, we get a bit outside of ourselves. And so a breath can So oftentimes when we start to experience anxiety, parts of our brain kind of take over and kick us into kind of this, hyperdrive type thing. So I've really found that a couple deep breaths, they don't solve everything. But what a deep breath will do is will actually just make room for some more options moving forward, instead of just hopping in that anxiety train and driving off into, all those wonderful places it drives us, as you all moms know. So taking a deep breath to start, And then one of the things that ties back to what we talked about earlier, but that has been really important to me, is saying, like, what negative outcome am I reading into this situation right now? And then occasionally I'm reading a negative outcome in because something happened in the past that really makes me believe it could happen again. So that might be a place that I want to extend some compassion to, of like, well, I did experience that really hard thing before, so I'm not surprised I'm reading this negative outcome in it. Like what you just shared about your experience at the hospital yesterday. I think we could have so much compassion for your brain and body going, wait a minute, I know some negative outcomes here for me that I would like to avoid. And anxiety wants to take over, and it wants to try to protect us. And we can appreciate, that, but we also know how unhelpful and how it can really lead us astray.
Yeah. I love that question that you ask. I think it's such a powerful pause and reflection question moment, where as soon as you notice that kind of spinning of anxiety, you can pause and ask that question. And the experience Kaitlyn's referring to is I shared on social media yesterday. So Levi had his annual MRI scan yesterday morning, which also happens to be the to the day 9-year anniversary from when he had his craniotomy, it was crazy. When it got scheduled, I was I don't know, I was like, wow, that's just nuts. A little cocky in a sense. I'm like, everyone's like, oh, have you been here before? I was like, I've got this. I've been here a million times. Like, an MRI scan, this is nothing. We've done brain surgery. And I think it's a way of protecting myself and kind of feeling like I have a little bit of control. And by being an expert, I guess, I don't know. It's silly, but we'll go with it. And so when I walked so Levi has to get a complete general anesthesia for his MRIs because impulse control and 45-minute scans don't really work together very well. And I walked into this room, and there was the anesthesiologist, there was the scan bed that he was going to lay on. And I've been in this room before, and my heart just started pounding, and I could barely hold back the tears. Like, it just welled up so powerfully. And I don't experience that level of intensity quickly like that often. So it really surprised me.
Yeah,
And I of course suppress it down because I was like, I don't want to cry in front of all these people, and the anesthesiologist be like, what's wrong with this mom? It's an MRI. And that wasn't about that. But I of course then conveniently then had 45 minutes to an hour to myself, and I went to my car and processed it. And I think it was exactly that question, right? Like, the negative outcome, my brain was predicting from the past of what happened or came close to happening, that because we were here in this situation, just by nature of us having the conditions that we do, that I could lose my son. And I just was confronted with it all in one moment.
Yeah.
And when I allowed myself to have a really good, deep cry and to be fully present with that emotion and the fear and the sadness and the grief, I was able to move to the other side. And almost all day, actually, just felt so connected to myself. I would say I felt so strong, like not from a place of protection, but really from a place of vulnerability. And anyhow, so thanks for bringing up that story. It's obviously very near, very fresh in my mind.
Yeah. I love the way that you were safe for yourself, that you made room for yourself in all of that, which is really unique and really hard for us to do. But that was so beautiful. Like, you just made room for yourself, and there was some stuff there that needed really kind of like a safe place or a container for. And I could imagine that then making you, safe for others because of the way you've learned to even do that for yourself and for your kids.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that I look back to myself 9 years ago as somebody that did not know how to create that space, that really I would not say I was somebody that had a lot of emotional adulthood. I was very ignorantly bliss, and life's always going to be work hard. Everything's going to be okay. And then, like, this hit us, And of course it was survival for so many years. And then I really said, okay, I have some work to do. I have a circumstance I'm up against, and I'm determined to not have it be the predictor that my life's not going to be fantastic. And so that's kind of what got me on my own coaching journey. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about Freedom Movement as a potential resource for anybody. And so let's hear a little bit about that.
Freedom Movement really started, the founder, Carrie Garcia, really started it because she grew up in the church and she had some experiences of really close people in her life who were in the church, but really never felt safe to share some of their heart, their story, and what was going on. And they didn't find some of those safe places. And, you know, it's really our heart that, that the church could learn to be, you know, the safest place for your story and for your heart. And also that we could come alongside one another to be safe for each other and to learn what that means to say, you know, a container, like I was saying, expand a bit so that whatever anyone brings to the table, there's a sense of we've got the tools and the understanding to walk with you. And so Freedom Movement does an amazing tour that's now postponed a bit. They also do some incredible trainings. So if you're someone who wants to continue to grow of what it looks like to partner well with people, we've got some incredible training for that. We also just really care about people's stories and people's hearts. And so that's kind of where my role as a therapist comes in. Is a lot of times people experience Freedom Movement and get connected with it in a way that really inspires them to want to explore their own story. I think for us as moms of kids with special needs, there is some really good work to be done there. And it's something I'm passionate about partnering with people in as well, because I have seen in my own life that it was honestly the hardest work I've ever done. And yet I think about the 14 years of this journey, and I am 100% a different person because of it. And I am so proud of her. I'm proud of who she has become because of that work. And I'm so thankful for the beauty that has grown in the midst of the suffering, the struggle, the pivots, the having to learn and grow. And I definitely wouldn't trade it. I have a ton of compassion and understanding to just really want to make room and be that container for people as they journey, whatever it might be, even if it's their own disabilities or mental health that's coming up. So I work with Freedom Movement doing one-on-one counseling. I have a group that I roll out occasionally on peace practices, and I'm hoping to maybe do one coming up supporting moms in this crazy time with all that we're up against. I've got 4 kids at 4 different schools, so I can understand the challenge that moms are up against right now. So I would love to offer some support for that in the same way that I'm still trying to champion, my own process of finding support and room to thrive in the midst of a really significantly challenging life season.
And is there a best way to reach you or to contact you? Where do you land on social most of the time?
So I do have my Instagram that you can post. I also, if you want to contact me for counseling or for what Freedom Movement offers, we have like a connection page that you can link on our Freedom Movement's website. And those are both easy ways to get a hold of me.
Amazing. And we'll definitely link everything up so it's very easy for everybody to find. Kaitlyn, I got chills several times in our conversation. I got so much value from it. And so I completely trust that this is going to connect with other people. And my vision for this podcast is that it's in some way a connection place, even though it's kind of weird because we're not actually gathering together, but that we connect to one another's story. And even though your daughter and my son have very different circumstances, I think our experiences as moms has so much overlap and similarity. So I'm so thankful for you. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your vulnerability today.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you because as I've been reading your Instagram, and I reached out about it, but as you share about your experiences as a mom with a kid with special needs, I keep finding myself in those experiences, and those are opportunities to remind myself, oh, that is you, even if it doesn't always look like it, or maybe there's not a specific, disability that makes you, confirmed of that. But I think for many of us moms, we kind of know in our heart that we have this unique path. And I love the idea of being able to really support one another because there is something that we know is different, and that different can be super hard. And that different can also be really beautiful.
I love that. Hard is not always bad. And there's so much beauty in this life. And these kids have brought us so much life and light. So thank you. And we'll see you in the next show. So there you have it. That's the end of our show for today. And I'm so glad you were with us. I have one quick favor to ask you. It is the request to subscribe and to share. And of course, please leave your feedback. I want to hear from you. I want to know more of what you want, more of what helped you, and of course, more of what touched you. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.